The sound of raised voices echoing through the thin walls of the boarding house made Kade Crawford freeze in his tracks, his hand halfway to the doorknob of his room. He had just returned from a long cattle drive, covered in dust and exhausted, but the words drifting through the hallway arrested his attention completely. $2,000, Mr. Nash, or there will be no wedding, a man's voice declared, sharp and businesslike. Your daughter is already 23 years old. Most women her age are married with children. You should be grateful I am willing to overlook her advanced age. Kade stood perfectly still in the dim hallway of the Reading boarding house, his jaw tightening. It was June of 1882, and while arranged marriages were not entirely uncommon, something about the coldness in that voice made his blood simmer. He had heard plenty of hard bargaining over cattle and horses in his 26 years, but hearing a woman discussed like livestock turned his stomach. Mr. Hutchinson, please, another voice replied, older and weary. I have explained our situation. The drought has been terrible this year. Our farm has barely produced enough to feed ourselves. I can offer you $500 and the deed to the north 40 acres. Unacceptable, the first voice snapped. I have my own land. What I need is capital to expand my business interests. $2,000, or I will find another bride. There are plenty of younger, more agreeable women in Sacramento who would jump at the chance to marry a successful merchant. Kade heard a soft, choked sound that might have been a sob, quickly stifled. His hand fell away from his own doorknob, and before he could think better of it, he found himself moving quietly down the hall toward the partially open door where the conversation was taking place. Through the gap, he could see 3 people in the small sitting room. An older man with graying hair sat slumped in a chair, his shoulders bowed under an invisible weight. Standing over him was a portly man in an expensive suit, his face florid with irritation and self-importance. But it was the young woman standing near the window who caught and held Kade's attention. She was turned partially away, her profile etched against the late afternoon light streaming through the dusty glass. Her hair was a rich chestnut brown, pulled back in a simple but elegant style, and even in her obvious distress, there was something striking about her bearing. She held herself very straight, very still, as though she were made of glass and the slightest movement might shatter her completely. Father, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying a thread of steel beneath the softness. Perhaps Mr. Hutchinson is right. Perhaps he should find someone more suitable. Eleanor! The older man exclaimed, looking up at her with desperate eyes. You do not know what you are saying. We need this alliance. Without it, we will lose the farm entirely. An alliance built on such terms is no alliance at all, Eleanor Nash replied, finally turning from the window. Kade could see her face now, and his breath caught slightly. She was beautiful, yes, but it was not merely her physical appearance that struck him. It was the quiet dignity in her expression, the way she refused to let tears fall, even though her eyes were bright with them, the set of her chin that spoke of a strength she was fighting to maintain. Miss Nash, your father is quite correct, Hutchinson said, his tone patronizing in a way that made Kade's fists clench. You are far too old to be particular. I am offering you security, a fine home in town, and a position of respect as my wife. In exchange, I require only a reasonable dowry to seal our arrangement. It is how these things are done. I thought marriages were supposed to be about more than financial transactions, Eleanor said softly, still looking at her father rather than at her betrothed. Hutchinson laughed, a short, unpleasant sound. How charmingly naive. Marriage is always a transaction, Miss Nash. I am offering you my name and my protection. Your father is offering me compensation for taking on the burden of a wife who is past her prime. It is a fair exchange. That was enough. Kade did not stop to think about propriety or the fact that this was none of his business. He pushed the door open wider and stepped into the room, all 3 occupants turning to stare at him in surprise. Pardon the interruption, Kade said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that anyone with sense would recognize as dangerous. But I could not help overhearing your conversation, and I feel compelled to offer a different perspective. Who are you? Hutchinson demanded, his face flushing an even deeper red. This is a private discussion. Kade Crawford, he replied, keeping his eyes on Eleanor, who was staring at him with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been hope. And I am staying in the room next door, which means your private discussion has been anything but private. Half the boarding house has probably heard every word you have said." Eleanor's face went pale, and Kade immediately regretted his bluntness, but he pressed on. "Mr. Hutchinson, I have spent my entire adult life working with cattle, and I know the sound of a man haggling over livestock when I hear it," Kade continued, finally turning his gaze to the merchant. "What I just heard was not a man discussing marriage with his future bride and her father. It was a man demanding payment for a service, treating a human being like property to be bought and sold." "How dare you?" Hutchinson sputtered, his jowls quivering with indignation. "My arrangement with Mr. Nash is entirely proper and follows all social conventions." "Social conventions that treat women as commodities," Kade shot back. "Miss Nash, if I may be so bold, you seem like an intelligent, capable woman. Do you truly wish to marry a man who values your father's money more than your heart?" Eleanor opened her mouth, closed it again, and looked between her father and Kade with an expression of such raw vulnerability that Kade wanted nothing more than to put himself between her and every cruel thing the world might throw at her. "I wish," she said finally, her voice breaking slightly, "to do what is best for my family. My own wishes are secondary." "That is the proper attitude for a woman," Hutchinson said approvingly, as if she were a dog who had just performed a trick. "You see, Mr. Crawford, Miss Nash understands her duty, even if you do not understand the ways of civilized society." Kade took a step closer to Hutchinson, and although he made no threatening gesture, something in his stance made the merchant take an involuntary step backward. "I understand plenty about civilized society," Kade said quietly. "I understand that a real man does not need to purchase a wife like he would purchase a horse. I understand that a real man would want a woman to choose him freely, not because her family is desperate. And I understand that Miss Nash deserves someone who wants her heart, not her father's bank account." The silence that fell over the room was profound. Eleanor was staring at Kade as though he had just spoken in a foreign language, her eyes wide and shimmering with unshed tears. Her father looked torn between relief and renewed despair, clearly recognizing the truth in Kade's words, but also understanding their implications for his own situation. Hutchinson's face had gone from red to purple. "This is outrageous," he spat. "Mr. Nash, if you cannot control the riffraff in this establishment, then I must conclude that our negotiations are at an end. I will not be insulted by some common cowboy who knows nothing of business or breeding." "Then I suggest you leave," Kade said, his voice still dangerously calm. "Because I am not going anywhere, and I do not believe I can keep my opinion to myself if you continue to speak about Miss Nash as though she were a piece of furniture." For a moment, Hutchinson looked as though he might argue further, but something in Kade's expression must have convinced him otherwise. He turned to Mr. Nash with a sneer. "You have 48 hours to reconsider and come up with the full amount," he said coldly. "After that, our engagement is dissolved, and I will expect the return of the ring I provided. Good day." He stormed out, pushing past Kade without another glance at Eleanor. The sound of his heavy footsteps retreating down the hallway seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. Mr. Nash dropped his head into his hands with a groan. "What have you done?" he whispered. "We are ruined, completely ruined." Kade felt a stab of guilt, but pushed it aside. "Sir, with all due respect, you were already in a bad situation. At least now your daughter is free of a man who would have made her miserable for the rest of her life." "Free?" Nash looked up, his face haggard. "Free to watch as we lose everything? Free to see her mother and younger sisters turned out of our home? What good is freedom when it comes with such a price?" Eleanor moved then, crossing the room to kneel beside her father's chair and take his weathered hands in her own. "Father, please do not distress yourself. We will find another way. We always have." "There is no other way," Nash said bitterly. "The bank has given us until the end of summer. If we cannot pay what we owe, they will foreclose. I have tried everything. Eleanor, everything. Hutchinson was our last hope." Kade watched the two of them, feeling the weight of what he had just done settle on his shoulders. He had acted on impulse, driven by righteous anger, but he had not stopped to think about the consequences for this family. Still, even knowing what he knew now, he could not bring himself to regret it. The thought of Eleanor Nash married to that pompous mercenary man made him feel physically ill. "How much do you owe?" Kade asked quietly. Nash looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Why do you care? You have already done quite enough damage." "Father," Eleanor said gently, her eyes on Cade with an expression he could not quite read. He was only trying to help. Help? Nash laughed bitterly. He has condemned us all. How much? Cade repeated, more firmly this time. There was a long pause before Nash answered. $3,000, that is what we owe the bank. I could have paid it with Hutchinson's business backing, but now? He trailed off helplessly. $3,000. It was a substantial sum, more money than most people saw in a lifetime. Cade had been saving for years, putting away every penny he could spare from his wages. He had been planning to buy his own ranch someday, to stop working for other men, and build something of his own. His savings amounted to just over $3,000, carefully deposited in the bank here in Reading. He should walk away. This was not his problem. He had done his good deed by speaking up, by giving Eleanor a moment of dignity, even if it cost her family their farm. He had his own dreams, his own plans. Giving away his entire life savings to strangers would be the height of foolishness. But when he looked at Eleanor, still kneeling beside her father's chair, with her back straight and her head high despite everything, he found himself saying, I can help. Both Eleanor and her father stared at him. What do you mean? Nash asked warily. I have savings, Cade said, the words coming out before he could stop them, before his practical side could overrule his heart. Enough to cover your debt to the bank. Eleanor rose to her feet, her eyes locked on his face. Mr. Crawford, you cannot possibly be serious. You do not even know us. I know enough, Cade replied, and it was true. He knew that she was willing to sacrifice her own happiness for her family. He knew that she had a spine of steel beneath her quiet exterior. He knew that in the few minutes he had been in her presence, she had affected him more deeply than any woman he had ever met. I know that you deserve better than to be sold to the highest bidder. I know that your father loves you enough to make hard choices. And I know that I have the means to help, so I should. We cannot accept such charity, Nash said, but there was a desperate hope creeping into his voice. It would not be right. It is not charity, Cade said, an idea forming even as he spoke. It would be a loan. You can pay me back over time, with reasonable interest. I will draw up proper papers, everything legal and above board. And what would you want as collateral? Nash asked, suspicion mixing with the hope now. The farm. Cade hesitated. The truth was he had not thought that far ahead, but looking at Eleanor's face, seeing the way she was watching him, with a mixture of gratitude and lingering wariness, he knew what he wanted. I would ask only one thing, he said slowly, keeping his eyes on Eleanor. Permission to court your daughter properly, not to purchase her, not to own her, but to see if perhaps we might suit each other, with no obligation on her part. If she decides I am not what she wants, the loan stands regardless. The silence that followed was even more profound than before. Eleanor's lips had parted slightly in surprise, and a faint flush had risen to her cheeks. Her father was looking between them with an expression that suggested he thought Cade might have lost his mind. You want to court Eleanor? Nash said slowly, as if testing the words. That is all? That is all, Cade confirmed. And only if she agrees. I will not force my attentions on any woman, no matter what money I might have lent her family. Eleanor had found her voice again. Mr. Crawford, this is incredibly generous, but I cannot help feeling that you are making a terrible mistake. You have worked hard for your savings. You should not throw them away on strangers simply because you disapprove of Mr. Hutchinson's methods. I am not throwing them away, Cade said gently. I am investing them in something worthwhile. Your family gets to keep their home. I get the opportunity to spend time with a woman who has already impressed me more in 10 minutes than most women I have known for years. And you get to make your own choice about your future, free from financial pressure. That seems like a good deal to me. But you do not know me, Eleanor protested. Though Cade could see something warming in her eyes, some barrier beginning to lower. I might be terrible company. I might have any number of awful qualities that are not immediately apparent. Then I will find out, and we will part as friends, Cade said with a slight smile, the first he had allowed himself since entering the room. But somehow, I do not think that is likely. Eleanor turned to her father, who was watching the exchange with an expression that was gradually shifting from shock to something approaching wonder. Father, she asked softly, what do you think? Nash looked at Cade for a long moment, and Cade met his gaze steadily, willing the older man to see that his intentions were genuine. I think, Nash said slowly, that this young man has already shown more respect for you in 15 minutes than Hutchinson showed in 6 months of courting. I think that if he is truly willing to help us with only that simple request in return, we would be fools not to accept. But Eleanor, the choice must be yours. I will not force you into anything, even if it costs us everything. The fact that Nash meant it was clear in every line of his face, and Cade's respect for the man increased considerably. He might have been desperate enough to arrange a marriage for his daughter, but he was not desperate enough to ignore her wishes entirely. Eleanor looked at Cade, really looked at him, and he had the sensation of being thoroughly evaluated. He wondered what she saw. A dusty cowboy, still wearing trail dirt and smelling of horses and sweat. A man who had just upended her life twice in the span of a few minutes. A stranger with a reckless streak and more money than sense. But apparently she saw something acceptable, because after a moment she nodded slowly. "Very well," she said quietly. "Mr. Crawford, I accept your offer, both the loan and the courtship. Though I warn you, I am not accustomed to being courted, and I may not know how to go about it properly." "Then we will figure it out together," Cade said, and the smile that broke across his face was genuine and warm. "I promise you, Miss Nash, I am not very good at proper courtship myself, but I am willing to try if you are." For the first time since he had entered the room, Eleanor smiled back at him. It was a small smile, tentative and a bit uncertain, but it transformed her entire face, lighting her eyes and softening the lines of strain around her mouth. "I suppose we should start with introducing ourselves properly," she said, a hint of gentle humor creeping into her voice. "Since you already know my name, but I know very little about you beyond the fact that you are apparently quite wealthy for a cowboy and have very strong opinions about marriage." Cade laughed, surprised and delighted by her composure. "Fair enough. As I said, I am Kade Crawford. I have been working cattle drives for the past 8 years, saving every penny I could. I have no family to speak of, just a few friends scattered across California and Nevada. I am 26 years old, I can cook reasonably well over a campfire, and I have been told I am decent at playing the harmonica, though that might have been people being polite." "And your plans?" Eleanor asked, tilting her head slightly. "Before you decided to lend your entire savings to strangers, what were you planning to do with your life?" It was a fair question, and Cade appreciated that she asked it. "I was planning to buy a ranch," he admitted. "Nothing fancy, just enough land to run a small herd and maybe grow some crops. A place of my own where I could put down roots. That dream is not gone, just postponed." Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes, something that might have been guilt or regret, but she quickly masked it. "I see. And now you will have to work longer to save again." "I will have to work longer regardless," Cade pointed out. "Money does not multiply by itself in a bank account. At least this way, I am doing something worthwhile with it in the meantime. And who knows, perhaps your father's farm will recover, he will pay back the loan ahead of schedule, and I will be able to buy my ranch sooner rather than later." "Perhaps," Eleanor said, though she did not sound entirely convinced. "Or perhaps you have just made a very expensive gesture for very little return." "That depends entirely on how our courtship goes," Cade said, and was rewarded with another small smile from her. Nash cleared his throat, reminding them both that he was still in the room. "Mr. Crawford, if you are truly serious about this arrangement, we should discuss the details. When can you make the funds available? The bank is pressing us quite urgently." "I can withdraw the money tomorrow morning," Cade said. "The bank opens at 9. If you would like to accompany me, we can settle the matter immediately." The relief that washed over Nash's face was almost painful to see. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Crawford. You cannot know what this means to my family." "Cade," he corrected gently, "if I am going to be courting your daughter, we should probably use first names." "Cade, then," Nash repeated, standing up and extending his hand. "I am Thomas, and I swear to you, we will pay back every penny, with interest, as quickly as we possibly can." Cade shook his hand firmly. "I know you will, Thomas. I am a good judge of character, and I can see that you are a man of your word." They discussed the practical details for a while longer, with Cade explaining that he would need to return to the cattle drive he had been working after a few days of rest in Reading. He would be gone for several weeks, but he would return as soon as the job was finished. Eleanor listened quietly, occasionally asking a question or offering a comment, and Cade found himself hyper-aware of her presence, of the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking, of the musical quality of her voice when she spoke. By the time the conversation wound down, the sun was setting outside the window, painting the room in shades of gold and amber. Thomas excused himself, saying he needed to send a telegram to his wife to let her know that their situation had changed, leaving Kade and Eleanor alone for the first time. The silence was not uncomfortable, but it was charged with awareness. Kade felt suddenly uncertain, unsure of what to say or do next. Eleanor seemed to be experiencing a similar difficulty, her hands clasped in front of her and her eyes fixed on the floor. "Miss Nash," Kade began, then corrected himself. "Eleanor, if I may call you that?" She looked up, meeting his eyes, and nodded. "Of course, and I will call you Kade." "Eleanor," he repeated, liking the way her name felt in his mouth. "I want you to know that I meant what I said earlier. I will not pressure you in any way. This courtship is entirely on your terms. If you decide at any point that you do not wish to continue, you have only to say so." Eleanor studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Why are you doing this, Kade? And please do not tell me again that it is because I impressed you or because you disapprove of Mr. Hutchinson. There must be more to it than that. People do not give away their life savings on a whim." It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. Kade thought about it for a moment, trying to put into words something he did not entirely understand himself. "I suppose," he said slowly, "it is because I know what it is like to have no choices. When I was younger, I had nothing. No family, no home, no prospects. I survived by taking whatever work I could find and being grateful for it. It took me years to claw my way to a place where I had options, where I could make decisions about my own life. And when I heard Hutchinson talking about you as though you were a commodity, treating your father's desperation as an opportunity to get what he wanted, it made me angry in a way I have not been angry in a long time." He paused, searching her face for understanding. "You deserve to have choices, Eleanor. Every person does. And if I can give that to you, if I can use my money to buy you the freedom to make your own decisions about your future, then that seems like the best possible use of it. Better than land, better than cattle, better than anything else I might spend it on." Eleanor's eyes had grown bright again, but this time, when the tears fell, she did not try to stop them. They slipped silently down her cheeks as she looked at him, and Kade felt a powerful urge to reach out and brush them away, but he kept his hands at his sides. "I do not know what to say," Eleanor whispered. "No one has ever done something like this for me. I do not know how to repay such kindness." "You do not need to repay it," Kade said softly. "Just give me a chance to know you. That is all I ask." Eleanor wiped at her cheeks with trembling fingers and nodded. "A chance to know me. Yes, I think I can do that." They stood there for another moment, the air between them crackling with possibility, and Kade felt something shift in his chest, something settling into place as though it had always belonged there. "I should let you rest," he said finally, reluctantly. "It has been a long day for both of us, and tomorrow we'll be busy with the bank business." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, but she did not move toward the door. "Kade." "Yes." "Thank you, not just for the money, but for what you said to Mr. Hutchinson. No one has ever stood up for me like that before. It meant more than you know." Kade felt warmth spread through his chest at her words. "You are very welcome, Eleanor. I have a feeling you are worth standing up for." He left then, before he could do something foolish like take her hand or say something that might scare her away. As he walked back to his own room, he could not stop the smile that spread across his face. He had just given away everything he owned, tied himself to a family of strangers, and committed to courting a woman he had known for less than an hour. It should have felt terrifying. Instead, it felt like the first truly right decision he had made in his entire life. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the California sun already warming the air by the time Kade made his way downstairs to the boarding house dining room. He had washed up as best he could with the basin in his room, changed into his one set of clean clothes, and attempted to make himself look respectable for the business ahead. Thomas and Eleanor were already waiting in the lobby when he arrived. Eleanor was wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, her hair neatly arranged and her expression composed, despite the nervous energy Kade could sense radiating from her. Thomas looked like a man who had barely slept, dark circles under his eyes, but a determined set to his jaw. "Good morning," Kade said, offering them both a smile. "Are you ready?" As ready as we will ever be, Thomas replied. Cade, I must ask you one more time if you are certain about this. Once the money leaves your account, there is no changing your mind. I am certain, Cade said firmly. Let us go. The bank was a solid brick building on Reading's main street, one of the more impressive structures in the growing town. Inside, it was cool and quiet, smelling of ink and paper and money. The banker, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles named Mr. Wilkes, looked surprised to see them, but greeted them professionally. The transaction took longer than Cade had expected, with papers to sign and details to review. Wilkes was clearly confused by the arrangement, unused to seeing a cowboy with such substantial savings, much less one willing to hand it all over to another family's debt. But Cade's money was good, and in the end, that was all that mattered. When it was done, Thomas held the receipt that proved his farm was no longer in danger of foreclosure, and Cade held a promissory note outlining the terms of repayment. Eleanor had insisted on signing as well, making herself personally responsible for ensuring the debt was honored. It is done, Thomas said, staring at the paper in his hands as though he could not quite believe it was real. We are free of the bank. My God, we are actually free. Free of the bank, Cade corrected with a slight smile. Not free of debt, but yes, the immediate crisis is resolved. They stepped out of the bank into the morning sunshine, and Cade felt oddly light despite having just parted with every cent he owned. Eleanor was watching him with an expression he could not quite read, something between gratitude and guilt and dawning curiosity. I should return home, Thomas said, folding the receipt carefully and tucking it into his pocket. My wife will want to hear this news in person. Eleanor, are you coming with me, or will you stay in town? Eleanor glanced at Cade, then back at her father. I think I will stay for a while, if that is acceptable. There are some things I need to purchase, and since we are no longer facing ruin, I might as well take care of them now. Thomas nodded, though Cade noticed the older man's eyes flickering between his daughter and Cade with a knowing look. Very well. I will see you this evening. Cade, will you join us for dinner? It seems only right that we should celebrate, and my wife will want to meet the man who saved our farm. I would be honored, Cade replied. What time should I arrive? 6 o'clock, Thomas said. We are about 5 miles north of town, on the road toward Shasta. The farm has a sign that says Nash at the gate. You cannot miss it. After Thomas left, Cade and Eleanor stood on the sidewalk, the morning bustle of Reading going on around them. Cade was acutely aware that they were truly alone together for the first time, without her father or the crisis to provide a buffer between them. So, Eleanor said, a hint of nervousness in her voice, you mentioned you needed to leave soon to finish your cattle drive? In 3 days, Cade confirmed. We are moving a herd from Oregon down to Sacramento. I have been with them for 6 weeks already, but I came into Reading for supplies and a bit of rest. I need to rejoin them, but I will be back within a month, 2 at the most. Eleanor nodded slowly. That is a long time. It is, Cade agreed, but I made a commitment to the job, and I need to see it through. The pay is good, and now that I have given away my savings, I need to start rebuilding. The guilt flashed in Eleanor's eyes again, and Cade immediately regretted his words. He reached out without thinking and gently touched her arm, drawing her attention. I did not mean that as a criticism, he said softly. I am not going to resent you for a choice I made freely. I promise. I know, Eleanor said, but she still looked troubled. It is just hard not to feel guilty when you have sacrificed so much for us. Then help me not feel like it was a sacrifice, Cade suggested. Spend today with me. Show me Reading. Tell me about yourself. Let me get to know you before I have to leave. That way I will have something good to think about during those long, boring days on the trail. A small smile tugged at Eleanor's lips. I do not know how interesting I can make Reading, California in 1882, but I can try. What would you like to see first? Whatever you want to show me, Cade said simply. I am happy as long as I am in your company. The words were perhaps too forward, too revealing, but Eleanor did not seem to mind. Her smile widened slightly and she gestured down the street. Well then, let me show you the general store. Mrs. Henderson, who runs it, is the biggest gossip in town, and by now she has probably heard about yesterday's excitement at the boarding house. We might as well give her something new to talk about. Cade laughed and offered Eleanor his arm, feeling a small thrill of pleasure when she accepted it without hesitation. They walked together down the wooden sidewalk, and if anyone noticed that Eleanor Nash, who had been engaged to the wealthy Mr. Hutchinson just yesterday, was now walking arm in arm with a cowboy, they were too polite or too interested in their own affairs to comment. Mrs. Henderson was indeed a gossip, and her eyes nearly popped out of her head when she saw Eleanor and Kade enter the store together. She immediately launched into a series of probing questions, trying to determine what had happened with the engagement and who this stranger was. Eleanor handled her with remarkable grace, politely deflecting the most intrusive questions while providing just enough information to satisfy basic curiosity. "This is Mr. Crawford," Eleanor said, her tone pleasant but firm. "He is a friend of the family who has very kindly agreed to help us with some financial matters. As for Mr. Hutchinson, I have decided that we do not suit after all, and our engagement has been dissolved by mutual agreement." It was not entirely truthful, but it was close enough, and Kade appreciated Eleanor's ability to navigate the social complexities without revealing too much. They made their purchases, Eleanor buying thread and fabric for what she said were some repairs needed at the house, and left Mrs. Henderson still bursting with questions she could not quite figure out how to ask. "Well handled," Kade said once they were back outside. "You are good at managing difficult people." "Years of practice," Eleanor said with a wry smile. "In a small town like Reading, everyone knows everyone else's business, or thinks they do. You learn to share enough to seem forthcoming without actually revealing anything important." They walked together through the town, Eleanor pointing out various landmarks and telling stories about the people who lived there. Kade found himself fascinated not just by what she said, but by how she said it, the subtle humor in her observations, the affection in her voice when she spoke of people she liked, the diplomatic way she described those she did not. She was intelligent and perceptive, and Kade found himself wanting to know everything about her, to understand how she thought and what made her laugh and what dreams she held close to her heart. They ended up at the edge of town, where the Sacramento River ran wide and lazy in the summer heat. There was a spot under some cottonwood trees where the bank sloped gently down to the water, and by unspoken agreement they settled there, Eleanor arranging her skirts carefully, while Kade stretched out on the grass beside her. "Tell me about growing up on the farm," Kade said, plucking a blade of grass and twisting it between his fingers. "What was it like?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment, gazing out at the water. "It was good," she said finally. "Hard, but good. My parents bought the land when I was very young, and we have built everything ourselves. My mother is one of the strongest women I know. She can do anything from birthing a calf, to preserving vegetables, to teaching children their letters. My younger sisters, Mary and Catherine, are still at home. Mary is 19 and engaged to a man from the next farm over. They will marry in the fall. Catherine is 16 and determined to become a teacher." "And what about you?" Kade asked gently. "What did you want to be before financial necessity intervened?" Eleanor looked at him, surprise flickering across her face, as though no one had ever asked her that before. "I wanted to write," she admitted quietly. "Stories? Mostly. I have notebooks full of them hidden in my room. Silly romantic tales and adventures, nothing that would ever be published, but they make me happy." "Why do you call them silly?" Kade asked, genuinely curious. "If they make you happy, they cannot be silly." "Because they are not practical," Eleanor said with a small, sad smile. "Because women who write stories are considered eccentric at best, and at worst they are seen as neglecting their proper duties. Because my family needed me to focus on real life, not fantasies." Kade sat up, turning to face her more directly. "Eleanor, I have been working cattle drives since I was 18 years old. I have spent countless nights sleeping on the hard ground, eaten more dust than food, and had every bone in my body bruised at one time or another. And you know what kept me going? Stories. The ones the other cowboys would tell around the fire. The books I would read when I got the chance. The dreams I would spin in my own head about what I would do someday. Stories are not silly. They are what make life bearable." Eleanor's eyes had gone soft, and she was looking at Kade as though seeing him anew. "You really believe that?" "I really do," Kade confirmed. "And I think you should keep writing your stories, Eleanor. In fact, I would be honored if you would let me read some of them someday." "I could not," Eleanor said, blushing. "They are too personal, too revealing." "Then tell me one instead," Kade suggested. "Just the bare bones of a plot. Let me see the world the way you imagine it." Eleanor bit her lip, clearly torn between embarrassment and temptation. Finally, temptation won. "All right," she said slowly. "There is one I have been working on lately. It is about a woman who runs away from home to avoid a marriage her parents have arranged. She disguises herself as a man and joins a group of prospectors heading to the gold fields. Along the way, she discovers that she is actually quite good at surviving on her own, and she starts to question whether she wants to go back to her old life at all, even if she could." "What happens?" Kate asked, genuinely intrigued. "Does she find gold?" "I have not decided yet," Eleanor admitted. "Part of me thinks she should find something more valuable than gold. Maybe independence or purpose, or a sense of who she really is beneath all the expectations society has placed on her. Or maybe she finds all of those things in gold," Cade suggested with a smile. "There is no rule that says a woman cannot have everything she wants." Eleanor laughed, a genuine, delighted sound that made Cade's heart skip a beat. "You are an optimist, Kade Crawford." "And you are a realist, Eleanor Nash," Cade replied. "Perhaps we balance each other out." They talked for hours, the conversation flowing easily from one topic to another. Cade told her about his travels, about the places he had seen and the people he had met. Eleanor told him about books she had read, about the little moments of beauty she found in everyday life on the farm, about her dreams and fears and hopes. By the time the sun was high overhead, Cade felt as though he had known Eleanor for years rather than hours. There was an ease between them that he had never experienced with anyone else, a sense of being truly seen and understood that was both exhilarating and slightly terrifying. They walked back to town slowly, neither of them in a hurry to end the day. Cade bought them lunch at the small restaurant on Main Street, and if the other diners stared at the unlikely pair, neither Cade nor Eleanor seemed to notice or care. "I should head back to the boarding house," Cade said reluctantly as the afternoon wore on. "I need to check in with my boss, let him know when I will be rejoining the drive. But I will see you tonight at dinner." "Yes," Eleanor said, and Cade thought he detected a note of reluctance in her voice as well, as though she was no more eager to part than he was. 6 o'clock. Do not be late, or my mother will think you have terrible manners." "I would not dream of it," Cade assured her. He hesitated, wanting to do something to mark the end of their time together, to show her how much the day had meant to him. But a handshake seemed too formal, and anything more would be far too forward. In the end, he simply smiled at her and said, "Thank you, Eleanor. Today has been one of the best days I can remember." The blush that rose to her cheeks was worth any amount of awkwardness. "It has been wonderful for me as well, Cade. I will see you tonight." Cade watched her walk away, her figure growing smaller as she headed toward the livery to collect her horse, and felt something tighten in his chest. 3 days? He had 3 days to spend with her before he had to leave for weeks, possibly months. It did not feel like nearly enough time. That evening, Cade borrowed a horse from the boarding house and rode out to the Nash farm, arriving exactly at 6 o'clock. The farm was smaller than he had expected, but well maintained, with neat fences and a vegetable garden that showed signs of careful tending, despite the drought Eleanor had mentioned. The house itself was modest but sturdy, painted white with green shutters and a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Before he could dismount, the front door opened and Eleanor appeared, followed by a woman who could only be her mother and 2 younger girls who were clearly her sisters. The family resemblance was striking, all of them sharing the same chestnut hair and fine features, though each had their own distinct look. "Cade!" Eleanor called, waving to him. "Come in, please. Everyone is eager to meet you." Cade tied his horse to the hitching post and made his way up to the porch, suddenly nervous in a way he had not been since he was a boy. This was Eleanor's family, the people who mattered most to her in the world. Their opinion of him would be important, would shape how Eleanor herself saw him. "Mrs. Nash," he said, removing his hat and offering a polite bow. "Thank you for having me in your home." Eleanor's mother was a handsome woman in her mid-40s, with kind eyes and work-worn hands. She smiled at him warmly, reaching out to clasp his hand in both of hers. "Mr. Crawford, we cannot thank you enough for what you have done for our family," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thomas told me everything. You are an answer to prayers I did not dare to pray." "Please, call me Cade," he said, feeling uncomfortable with such effusive gratitude. "And I am happy to help." "These are my daughters, Mary and Catherine," Mrs. Nash said, gesturing to the 2 younger women. Mary was pretty in a conventional way, with a sweet smile and gentle demeanor. Catherine was more striking, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a direct gaze that reminded him of Eleanor. "It is a pleasure to meet you both," Kade said. "Is it true you gave up all your money for us?" Catherine asked bluntly, ignoring her mother's gasp of dismay at such a forward question. "That seems foolish." "Catherine!" Eleanor exclaimed, clearly mortified, but Kade just laughed. "It does seem foolish when you put it that way," he agreed, liking the girl's directness. "But I prefer to think of it as an investment in good people and a good cause. Besides, your sister agreed to let me court her, which I think makes it a very smart investment indeed." Catherine studied him for a moment longer, then nodded as if satisfied. "I suppose that is reasonable. Welcome to our home, Kade." Dinner was a lively affair, the kind of warm family meal that Kade had rarely experienced in his own life. The food was simple but delicious, the conversation flowing easily, despite the slightly surreal circumstances that had brought them all together. Thomas was in much better spirits than he had been the previous day. The weight of his worry lifted now that his farm was secure. Mrs. Nash fussed over Kade, making sure his plate was never empty, while Mary asked polite questions about his work and Catherine interrogated him about his intentions toward Eleanor. Eleanor herself was quieter than she had been during their time alone together, but Kade caught her watching him several times with a small smile on her lips, and each time their eyes met, he felt that same electric awareness sparking between them. After dinner, Eleanor offered to show him around the farm. They walked together through the gathering dusk, Eleanor pointing out the barn and the chicken coop and the fields where they grew wheat and corn. Kade listened and asked questions, genuinely interested in her family's operation. But he was more interested in just being near her, in the occasional brush of her arm against his as they walked. "Your family is wonderful," Kade said as they stood at the fence looking out over the fields. "You are very lucky to have them." "I know," Eleanor said softly. "They mean everything to me, which is why I was willing to marry Mr. Hutchinson, even though the thought of it made me feel ill. I could not bear to see them lose everything they have worked so hard to build." "You do not have to explain," Kade said gently. "I understand." "Do you?" Eleanor turned to face him, her expression serious in the fading light. "Do you really understand, Kade? Because I need you to know that I am grateful for what you have done, more grateful than I can ever express. But I will not let you sacrifice yourself for me, the way I was willing to sacrifice myself for my family. If courting me becomes a burden, if you realize that you have made a terrible mistake, I will release you from this arrangement with no hard feelings." Kade reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. Her fingers were cool and slightly rough from work, and they fit perfectly in his grasp. "Eleanor, look at me," he said quietly. She raised her eyes to his, and he saw uncertainty there, and fear, and a fragile hope she was trying to protect. "I did not make a mistake. I made a choice, and every moment I spend with you convinces me more that it was the right one. You are remarkable. You are strong and intelligent and kind. You care about your family enough to put their needs before your own, but you are also brave enough to dream about something more, and I would be honored, truly honored, if you would give me the chance to prove that I can be the kind of man who deserves you." Eleanor's eyes had filled with tears, but she was smiling through them, her fingers tightening around his. "You already are that kind of man, Kade. That is what scares me. You are so good, and I am afraid I will disappoint you somehow." "That is impossible," Kade said with absolute certainty. "You could not disappoint me if you tried." They stood there in the gathering darkness, hands clasped, and Kade felt the rest of the world fall away. It did not matter that he had known her for less than 2 days. It did not matter that he was about to leave for weeks. What mattered was this moment, this connection, this feeling of rightness that suffused every cell of his body. "I have to leave the day after tomorrow," Kade said reluctantly, hating the words even as he spoke them. "But I will come back, Eleanor. As soon as the drive is finished, I will come straight back to Reading. Will you wait for me?" "Yes," Eleanor said simply. "I will wait." Kade wanted to kiss her. The urge was nearly overwhelming, to close the small distance between them and press his lips to hers, to show her without words what he was feeling. But it was too soon, too fast, and Eleanor deserved to be courted properly, not rushed into something physical before she was ready. So instead, he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, feeling her shiver slightly at the contact. "Thank you," he murmured against her skin, for giving me this chance. I promise I will not waste it." The next 2 days passed in a blur. Kade spent every possible moment with Eleanor, and they fell into an easy rhythm that felt both new and ancient, as though they had been doing this dance their entire lives. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and opinions and dreams. Eleanor showed him more of the farm and introduced him to the animals she had raised from babies. Kade helped with some of the heavier chores, mending a fence that had been damaged in a recent storm and fixing the barn door that had been hanging crooked. On the final evening before he had to leave, they sat together on the porch swing as the sun set over the fields, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Eleanor's family had tactfully left them alone, giving them privacy for their goodbye. "I am going to miss you," Eleanor said quietly, her shoulder pressed against his as they rocked gently back and forth. "Is that foolish? To miss someone you have only known for 3 days?" "If it is foolish, then I am just as guilty," Kade replied, his arm resting along the back of the swing, not quite touching her, but close enough that he could feel her warmth. "I have been dreading this moment since yesterday." "How long do you think you will be gone?" Eleanor asked. 6 weeks, maybe 8, Kade said. "It depends on the weather and how the cattle cooperate. But I will write to you as often as I can. I am not much of a writer, but I will do my best." "I will write back," Eleanor promised, "and I will be here waiting when you return." Kade turned to look at her, memorizing her face in the golden light, wanting to carry this image with him through all the long days ahead. "Eleanor, I know this is happening fast. I know we barely know each other, but I need you to understand something. Whatever happens while I am gone, whatever doubts or second thoughts you might have, I want you to know that my feelings are genuine. I am not courting you because of the loan or because I feel obligated. I am courting you because when I look at you, I see a future I never dared to imagine for myself." Eleanor had tears in her eyes again, but she was smiling. "I see it too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." "Good," Kade said softly. "The best things in life are usually terrifying." He left early the next morning, before dawn, because he could not bear a drawn-out goodbye. But Eleanor was waiting for him anyway, standing in the yard wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. She pressed a small package into his hands. "For the journey," she said. "It is not much, just some food and a few small things. But I wanted you to have something to remember me by." Inside the package, Kade found dried fruit and jerky, a new pair of socks that Eleanor must have been working on late into the night, and a small leather-bound journal. When he opened it, he found that Eleanor had written on the first page in neat, careful script. "For your stories or your thoughts, or just to know that someone is thinking of you every day until you return. Yours always, Eleanor." Kade looked up at her, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the one thing of value he still owned, a silver harmonica that had belonged to his father, the only thing he had left of the family he had lost so long ago. "Keep this safe for me," he said, pressing it into her hands. "I will come back for it. I will come back for you." Eleanor clutched the harmonica to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "I will keep it safe, I promise. Please be careful, Kade." "I will," he assured her. "And Eleanor, you deserve everything good this world has to offer. Remember that while I am gone." He mounted his horse then, because if he stayed another moment, he would not be able to leave at all. As he rode away, he turned back once to see her still standing there, a small figure in the growing light, one hand raised in farewell. The cattle drive was every bit as grueling as Kade had expected, made worse by the fact that every night when he lay down to sleep, all he could think about was Eleanor. He read and reread the message she had written in the journal, and he filled the pages with his own thoughts and observations, writing about the landscape they passed through, the men he worked with, and mostly about how much he missed her. He wrote her letters, too, whenever they stopped near a town with a post office. They were awkward, halting things at first, full of crossed-out words and rephrased sentences, but they got easier with practice. He told her about his days, asked about hers, and tried to convey in words what he had felt so clearly when he was with her. Her letters back were everything he could have hoped for, and more. She wrote beautifully, painting pictures with words that made him feel as though he were there with her, sitting on the porch or walking through the fields. She told him about the farm, about her sisters, about the books she was reading, and the stories she was writing. And she told him, in carefully chosen words that still made his heart race, that she missed him too. The weeks dragged by with agonizing slowness. The work was hard and dangerous, with river crossings that nearly cost them half the herd, and a stampede that left 2 men injured. But Kade kept pushing forward, driven by the knowledge that each day brought him closer to the end of the drive and closer to seeing Eleanor again. It was 7 weeks to the day when they finally reached Sacramento and delivered the herd. Kade collected his wages, said his goodbyes to the crew, and immediately bought a train ticket back to Redding. The train would be faster than riding, and he could not bear to wait even 1 extra day. He arrived in Redding on a hot afternoon in late August, dusty and exhausted, but too excited to care. He did not even stop at the boarding house to wash up or change clothes. Instead, he rented a horse and rode straight out to the Nash farm, his heart pounding with anticipation. The farm looked good, he noticed as he approached, better than when he had left. The fields were showing signs of a decent harvest, and there were new chickens in the yard. But Kade barely registered any of it because Eleanor had appeared on the porch, and the sight of her stopped his breath in his chest. She had seen him coming and was hurrying down the steps, her skirts lifted to keep from tripping, her face lit with joy. Kade barely had time to dismount before she reached him, and then she was there, real and solid and even more beautiful than he remembered. "You are back," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "You came back." "Of course I came back," Kade said, drinking in the sight of her. "Did you doubt it?" "Not for a moment," Eleanor replied. And then she was in his arms, propriety forgotten, her face pressed against his chest. Kade held her tight, one hand cradling the back of her head, and felt something that had been knotted tight inside him finally release. "I missed you so much," he murmured into her hair. "Every single day." "I missed you too," Eleanor said, pulling back just enough to look up at him. "I read your letters over and over, and I have been counting the days until you returned." Kade could not help himself any longer. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks, and asked, "May I kiss you, Eleanor?" "Please," she whispered, and Kade lowered his head to capture her lips with his. It was everything a first kiss should be, soft and sweet and full of promise. Eleanor's hands came up to grip his shirt, and Kade pulled her closer, pouring 7 weeks of longing into the kiss. When they finally parted, both of them were breathing hard, and Eleanor's face was flushed. "That was worth waiting for," she said, a bit dazed, and Kade laughed with pure joy. "We have all the time in the world now," he said. "I am not going anywhere." The next few months were the happiest of Kade's life. He found work on a nearby ranch, a position that allowed him to stay in the area and see Eleanor regularly. He continued to court her properly, with dinners at the Nash home and walks together and stolen moments whenever they could manage them. Her family welcomed him wholeheartedly, treating him like one of their own. Even Catherine, who had been skeptical at first, came to approve of him, declaring one evening that he was acceptable for a cowboy. Kade took it as the high compliment it was meant to be. As autumn turned to winter, Kade found himself thinking more and more about the future. His feelings for Eleanor had only deepened with time, growing from that initial spark of attraction into something profound and enduring. He loved her simply and completely, and he could no longer imagine his life without her in it. On a cold December evening, he asked Thomas for permission to marry Eleanor. Thomas gave it readily, with tears in his eyes and a firm handshake that conveyed more than words ever could. Kade proposed to Eleanor on Christmas Eve, in the barn where they had spent so many evenings talking while he helped with chores. He did not have a ring yet, planning to take her to town to choose one together, but he had the words he had been rehearsing for weeks. "Eleanor Nash," he said, taking both her hands in his and dropping to one knee in the hay. "7 months ago, I overheard a man treating you like property, and I thought I was angry on behalf of a stranger. But I think maybe some part of me already knew, even then, that you were going to change my life. You are the strongest, kindest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. You make me want to be better, to do better, to build a life that is worthy of you. I know I am just a cowboy with more determination than sense, and I know I gave away all my money, which might have been foolish, but I promise you that I will work every day for the rest of my life to make you happy. Will you marry me?" Eleanor was crying, but she was also smiling, and she pulled him up to his feet so she could kiss him. "Yes," she said against his lips. "Yes, yes, yes, I will marry you, Kade Crawford. I love you so much." "I love you too," Cade said, his voice rough with emotion. More than I thought it was possible to love anyone. They were married in the spring of 1883, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Reading. Eleanor wore a dress her mother and sisters had made together, and Cade wore a new suit he had saved up for specially. Mary was a bridesmaid, and Catherine read a poem Eleanor had written specially for the occasion. Thomas walked Eleanor down the aisle with obvious pride, and when he placed her hand in Cade's, he whispered, "Take care of her." "Always," Cade promised, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house where they had first met, the same place where Cade had overheard the conversation that had changed both their lives. As they lay together in the darkness, Eleanor's head on his chest and his arms wrapped around her, Cade thought about how far they had come. "Are you happy?" he asked softly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Eleanor replied. "When I think about how close I came to marrying Mr. Hutchinson, and how different my life would have been." She shuddered slightly. "You do not have to think about that anymore," Cade said firmly. "You are mine now, and I am yours, and nothing is ever going to change that." "I still cannot believe you gave up all your money for me," Eleanor said, not for the first time. "For us." "Best investment I ever made," Cade said with a smile. "Though I have to admit, I have been thinking about that ranch I wanted to buy. Maybe someday we will have enough saved up to make it happen." Eleanor propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him in the dim light. "I have been thinking about that too, and I have a confession to make." "What kind of confession?" Cade asked, suddenly nervous. "My father has been doing very well with the farm," Eleanor said. "The harvest this year was excellent, and he has been able to pay back more of your loan than we originally expected. He wanted to surprise you with it as a wedding gift, but I think you should know now. He is going to pay back the entire loan within the year, with full interest." Cade sat up, genuinely shocked. "Eleanor, that is wonderful news, but he does not have to rush. The terms we agreed on gave him 5 years. "He knows," Eleanor said, "but he also knows how much you sacrificed, and he wants to see you get your dream. We all do. Cade, you saved our family. You gave us back our home and our future. The least we can do is help you achieve your own dreams." Cade pulled her close, overwhelmed by the generosity of these people he had come to love like his own family. "Thank you," he said simply. "But you should know, my dream has already come true. Everything else is just extra." They lived with Eleanor's family for the first year of their marriage, saving every penny they could. Cade worked long hours at the neighboring ranch, and Eleanor took in sewing and helped her mother with the farm work. It was not always easy, but they were happy, building their life together one day at a time. True to his word, Thomas paid back the loan in full by the end of 1883, and he insisted on adding an extra $500 as thanks for what Cade had done. With that money and their savings, Cade and Eleanor began looking for land of their own. They found it in the spring of 1884, a beautiful piece of property about 10 miles from the Nash farm, with good water and fertile soil. It was smaller than Cade had originally dreamed of, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Building the ranch was hard work, but they did it together. Cade handled the heavy labor, while Eleanor managed the planning and organization. And together, they created something that reflected both of their dreams. They started with cattle, then added some horses, and Eleanor insisted on having chickens and a large vegetable garden. By the summer of 1885, the Crawford Ranch was thriving, and Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. The news filled Cade with a joy so profound he could barely put it into words. He spent the pregnancy fussing over Eleanor, worrying about her constantly, and driving her slightly mad with his protectiveness. Their son was born in February of 1886, a healthy baby boy with his mother's eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him Thomas after Eleanor's father, and Cade held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Cade whispered, staring down at the tiny face, "just like his mother." "He has your stubbornness," Eleanor said with a tired laugh. "He fought coming into this world with everything he had." "Good," Cade said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "He will need that stubbornness to survive having me as a father." Eleanor reached up to cup his cheek, her eyes soft with love. "You are going to be a wonderful father, Cade, just like you are a wonderful husband." Life settled into a rhythm after Thomas was born. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, and Kade found that he loved being a father almost as much as he loved being Eleanor's husband. He would spend his days working the land and his evenings playing with his son and talking with his wife, and he could not imagine wanting anything more. 2 years later, Eleanor gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She had Eleanor's chestnut hair and Cade's smile, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the moment she arrived. As the years passed, Kade and Eleanor's ranch became one of the most successful in the region. They were known for their quality cattle and their fair dealings, but more than that, they were known for the love they so clearly had for each other and for their family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kade took Eleanor back to the boarding house in Reading, to the room where they had spent their wedding night. The proprietor, who remembered them, was happy to let them stay in the same room for old times' sake. As they lay in bed that night, Kade pulled Eleanor close and kissed her softly. "Do you remember what I said to you the day we met? About how you deserved someone who wanted your heart?" "I remember," Eleanor said, smiling. "It was the moment I started falling in love with you, though I did not realize it at the time." "I wanted you to know that I still believe that," Kade said seriously. "And I hope you feel that you got what you deserved. Because, Eleanor, you have my whole heart, now and always." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. "I did get what I deserved," she said softly. "I got you, and our beautiful children, and this wonderful life we have built together. I got everything I never dared to dream about, and it is all because you were brave enough to walk through that door and tell a stranger that she was worth more than money." "You were worth more than money," Kade said firmly. "You were worth everything I had, and more. You still are." They kissed then, a long, sweet kiss that held 10 years of love and partnership and shared dreams. And as Kade held his wife in his arms, he thought about that day in June of 1882, when he had overheard a man demanding a dowry and made an impulsive decision that had changed his entire life. He had given away his life savings that day, and in return, he had received something priceless, a love that would last a lifetime, a family that filled his days with joy, and a sense of belonging he had never known before. It was, without question, the best trade he had ever made. As the years continued to pass, the Crawford Ranch flourished beyond anything Kade had initially imagined. By 1890, they had expanded their land holdings, adding another 100 acres that bordered the original property. Thomas, now 4 years old, was already showing an interest in the ranch work, following his father around and asking endless questions about everything from cattle to crops. Rose, at 2, was a spirited child who kept Eleanor busy but filled their home with laughter. Kade had also started breeding horses, a venture that proved both profitable and satisfying. He had a gift for it, an instinct for matching bloodlines that produced strong, intelligent animals. Eleanor managed the books and correspondence, her neat handwriting and sharp mind for numbers proving invaluable to their operation. But, despite their success, they never forgot where they had come from, or the people who had helped them along the way. Thomas and his wife were frequent visitors to the Crawford Ranch, and Kade and Eleanor made sure to visit the Nash farm regularly as well. Mary had married her sweetheart and now had 3 children of her own, while Catherine had indeed become a teacher, running the school in Reading with enthusiasm and dedication. The bond between the two families remained strong, strengthened by shared history and genuine affection. Kade often thought about how different his life would have been if he had not walked through that door on that June afternoon in 1882. If he had minded his own business, kept his money, and pursued his original dream of a solitary ranch somewhere. He would have had land, probably more land than he had now. He would have had cattle and independence and the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. But he would not have had Eleanor's laugh echoing through his house, or Thomas's small hand in his as they walked the property line, or Rose's arms around his neck when he came in from a long day's work. He would not have had the warm welcome of the Nash family, or the deep friendships he had formed in the community. He would have had a ranch, but he would not have had a home. In the fall of 1892, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder on her, and Kade worried constantly, hovering even more than he had with the previous 2. But Eleanor bore his concern with patience and good humor, and in April of 1893, she gave birth to twin girls. They named them Grace and Hope, and Kade held both his daughters in his arms and wept openly, not caring who saw. Eleanor watched him with a soft smile, exhausted but radiant, and whispered, "Our family is complete now, I think." "It is perfect," Kate agreed, carefully settling the twins in the cradle he had built specially for them. "Just like you." With 4 children now, life became both more chaotic and more full. The ranch house echoed with the sounds of children playing, arguing, laughing, and learning. Eleanor somehow managed to keep everyone fed and clothed while also maintaining her writing, filling notebook after notebook with the stories that still brought her joy. Cade would sometimes find her in the evening after the children were in bed, bent over her desk with ink-stained fingers and a look of intense concentration on her face. He loved those moments, loved watching her create worlds with her words, loved that she had never given up on this part of herself, despite all the demands of ranch life and motherhood. One evening in the summer of 1895, he found her crying over a letter. Alarmed, he immediately went to her side, kneeling beside her chair and taking her hands in his. "Eleanor, what is wrong? What has happened?" She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Nothing is wrong," she said, her voice shaking. "Cade, something wonderful has happened. A publisher in San Francisco wants to publish my book." Cade stared at her, not quite understanding at first. "Your book? You mean one of your stories?" Eleanor nodded vigorously. "I sent a manuscript to several publishers months ago, not really expecting anything to come of it. But this publisher, Mr. Davies, he says he loves it. He wants to print it. He wants to pay me for it, Cade. My story is going to be a real book." Cade pulled her up out of the chair and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. "That is incredible. I am so proud of you, Eleanor. I told you your stories were not silly. I told you they were worth sharing." "You did," Eleanor agreed, hugging him tightly. "You believed in me when no one else did, not even myself." "I will always believe in you," Cade said seriously, setting her back on her feet and cupping her face in his hands. "Always." Eleanor's book was published in the spring of 1896, a romantic adventure story about a woman finding her own path in the West. It was not a huge success, but it sold respectably, and Eleanor received letters from readers who had been moved by her words. She was already working on a second book, inspired by the encouragement. Life continued its steady rhythm. Thomas grew tall and strong, showing signs of becoming a fine rancher like his father. Rose proved to have a gift with horses, able to gentle even the most skittish animals with patience and soft words. The twins were inseparable, always together, always scheming some new adventure that usually ended with muddy dresses and scraped knees. Cade watched his children grow, with a heart so full it sometimes felt like it might burst. He taught Thomas everything he knew about ranching, passing down knowledge and skills, but also values, making sure his son understood the importance of integrity and hard work. He spent hours with Rose in the stables, marveling at her natural ability with the horses, and he chased the twins around the yard, listening to their laughter and remembering how silent and empty his life had been before Eleanor. In 1898, when Thomas turned 12, Cade took him on his first cattle drive, a shorter run to Sacramento. It was important to Cade that his son understand all aspects of the ranching business, including the hard, dirty work that went into moving cattle to market. They were gone for 3 weeks, and when they returned, Thomas was sunburned and exhausted but glowing with pride at having completed the journey. "You did well," Cade told his son that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I am proud of you." "Thank you, Father," Thomas said, sitting up a little straighter. "I want to be just like you when I grow up." Cade felt emotion tighten his throat. He put his arm around his son's shoulders and pulled him close. "You will be better than me," he said quietly. "You are growing up with advantages I never had. A home, a family who loves you, land that will be yours someday. You are going to do great things, Thomas." "Will you tell me again about how you met Mother?" Thomas asked, as he had asked many times before. "About how you gave away all your money for her?" Cade smiled. His children loved that story, had heard it countless times, but never seemed to tire of it. "Your mother was engaged to a terrible man," he began, launching into the familiar tale. "A man who wanted money more than he wanted her heart. And when I heard him talking about her like she was property to be bought, I could not stay silent." As he told the story, Eleanor emerged from the house with Rose and the twins. They settled around him on the porch, Eleanor taking her place beside him on the bench while the girls sat at their feet. It had become a family tradition, these storytelling evenings, where they would share memories and tales as the stars came out. And then, what happened? Grace asked, even though she knew the answer by heart. Then I told your mother that she deserved someone who wanted her heart, Kade said, looking at Eleanor and seeing the girl she had been, standing by that window in the boarding house, trying so hard not to cry. And I decided that I wanted to be that someone. That is so romantic, Rose sighed, leaning against her mother's knee. It was impulsive and possibly foolish, Eleanor said, but she was smiling. Your father gave away everything he owned for a family he did not know. But you paid him back, Hope pointed out. Grandfather paid back all the money. He did, Kade agreed, but that was never what mattered. What mattered was that your mother was free to make her own choice, and she chose me. Best choice I ever made, Eleanor said softly, reaching over to take his hand. They sat there as darkness fell, the family close and complete, and Kade felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. This was what he had been searching for all those years ago, even if he had not known it at the time. Not just land or cattle or success, but this. A family, a home, a love that grew deeper with each passing year. The 20th century dawned with celebration across the nation, and the Crawford family was no exception. They threw a party at the ranch, inviting the Nash family and neighbors and friends from town. There was food and music and dancing, and Kade held Eleanor in his arms as midnight struck, kissing her as fireworks exploded in the distance. Here's to the new century, Eleanor said, her eyes sparkling, and to all the years ahead. To all the years ahead, Kade echoed. With you by my side, I am ready for anything. As the years of the new century unfolded, the Crawford Ranch continued to prosper. Thomas took on more responsibility, effectively running much of the day-to-day operations by the time he was 18. Rose began breeding horses seriously, developing a line that became sought after throughout Northern California. The twins, now in their early teens, were both attending Catherine's school in town and showing academic promise. Kade was 44 now, his hair starting to show silver at the temples, his body bearing the marks of years of hard physical labor. But he was healthy and strong and deeply content with the life he had built. Eleanor, at 41, was still as beautiful to him as she had been the first day he saw her. Her hair had a few strands of silver as well, and there were lines around her eyes from years of smiling, but she moved through their home and their life with a grace and confidence that took his breath away. She had published 3 more books over the years, each one more successful than the last. She was not famous exactly, but she had a loyal readership, and the extra income from her writing had helped send the children to good schools and had allowed them to make improvements to the ranch. In 1902, Thomas announced his intention to marry a young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. Kade liked the girl, who was sweet-natured and practical and clearly adored his son. The wedding was planned for the fall, and as Kade watched his son with his future bride, he was reminded powerfully of his own courtship with Eleanor. "Do you feel old?" Eleanor asked him one evening as they discussed the wedding plans. "Our son is getting married. That makes us officially middle-aged, I think." "I feel blessed," Kade said simply. "Every day I wake up next to you, I feel blessed. The rest is just details." Eleanor leaned over and kissed him softly. "You are a romantic, Kade Crawford. You always have been." "Only with you," Kade replied. "You bring it out in me." Thomas and Sarah's wedding was a beautiful affair, held at the ranch on a perfect autumn day. Kade walked his son to the altar with tears in his eyes, remembering the tiny baby he had held in his arms 16 years ago, the little boy who had followed him everywhere, the young man who now stood ready to start his own family. "Be happy," Kade whispered to Thomas before stepping back. "Love her with everything you have. That is the secret to a good life." "I will, Father," Thomas promised. "I learned from the best." In 1903, Rose announced that she had received a proposal from a young horse trainer named James, who had been working at the ranch for the past year. Kade had seen it coming, had watched the 2 young people growing closer, but it still hit him hard. His little girl, his Rose, was ready to leave the nest. But he gave his blessing readily because he could see that James was a good man who loved Rose for exactly who she was. They married the following spring, and James officially became a partner in the horse breeding operation, bringing his own expertise and connections to the enterprise. The twins were next, both of them heading off to a women's college in San Francisco in 1904. Kade and Eleanor accompanied them to the city, helping them settle into their dormitory, and Kade found himself fighting back tears as he hugged his daughters goodbye. "I cannot believe they are all grown up," he said to Eleanor on the train ride home. "Where did the time go?" "It went into building something beautiful," Eleanor said, squeezing his hand. "We raised 4 wonderful children who are ready to make their own marks on the world. That is something to be proud of, not sad about." "I am proud," Kade assured her. "And yes, maybe a little sad too. Is that allowed?" "It is absolutely allowed," Eleanor said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "But look at the bright side. Now we have the house to ourselves again. Remember what that was like?" Kade laughed, pulling her closer. "I do remember. It was nice. Quiet." "Very quiet," Eleanor agreed. "We might have to figure out how to fill all that silence." They did figure it out, rediscovering each other in new ways now that the demands of active parenting had eased. They took trips together, traveling to San Francisco to visit the twins and exploring other parts of California they had never seen. They spent long evenings talking about everything and nothing, just as they had during their courtship all those years ago. The ranch remained busy with Thomas and Sarah running the cattle operation and Rose and James handling the horses. Grandchildren began to arrive, first Thomas and Sarah's son in 1904, then Rose and James's daughter in 1905. Kade discovered that being a grandfather was perhaps even better than being a father. All the joy with less of the worry. In 1908, on their 25th wedding anniversary, Kade surprised Eleanor with a trip to the Pacific coast. They stayed in a small hotel overlooking the ocean, and they spent their days walking on the beach and their evenings watching the sunset over the water. On their last evening there, they sat on the beach as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. Eleanor was nestled against Kade's side, his arm around her shoulders, both of them peaceful and content. "Kade," Eleanor said softly, "do you ever regret it, giving away all your money that day?" Kade turned to look at her, surprised by the question. "Not for a single second. Why would you ask that?" "I just wonder sometimes," Eleanor said. "You had plans, dreams of your own. You gave them all up for me." "I did not give them up," Kade corrected gently. "I revised them. And every revision was better than the original. Eleanor, when I was young and alone and saving for that ranch, I thought I wanted isolation and independence. I thought I wanted to prove that I could make it on my own. But what I really wanted, what I needed without knowing it, was you, was family, was belonging." He cupped her face in his hands, looking into her eyes with all the love he felt. "You did not take my dreams away, Eleanor. You gave me better ones. You gave me everything." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, and she kissed him softly. "I love you so much, more now than even on our wedding day, if that is possible." "It is possible," Kade said, "because I feel the same way. Every year with you is better than the last." They stayed there on the beach until full dark, holding each other and listening to the waves, 25 years of memories binding them together more strongly than any wedding vow ever could. As they entered the 1910s, Kade and Eleanor settled comfortably into their role as the patriarch and matriarch of a growing family. The twins graduated from college, Grace becoming a teacher like her Aunt Catherine, and Hope returning to help manage the business side of the ranch. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter during family gatherings. Thomas proved to be an exceptional rancher, taking the operation to new heights and earning respect throughout the region. Rose's horse breeding program had become renowned, with buyers coming from as far as Nevada and Oregon to purchase her stock. The Crawford name meant something now, represented quality and integrity and success. But through it all, Kade never forgot the core truth that had guided his life since that June day in 1882. Success was not measured in acres or cattle or money. It was measured in love freely given and received. It was measured in the life you built with the people who mattered most. On a warm evening in June of 1912, exactly 30 years after the day they met, Kade and Eleanor stood together on the porch of their ranch house. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Thomas and Sarah were talking with Rose and James about the next breeding season. The twins were inside helping with dinner preparations. 30 years, Eleanor marveled, leaning against Kade's side. "Can you believe it has been 30 years since you overheard Mr. Hutchinson demanding that ridiculous dowry?" "Best day of my life," Kade said immediately. Well, second best. The best was when you agreed to marry me. You are impossible, Eleanor said, but she was smiling. You know what I realized recently? We never told the children what actually became of Mr. Hutchinson. I do not think I ever asked, Kate admitted. I was too focused on you to care about him. He married someone else, Eleanor said, a woman from Sacramento with a substantial inheritance. According to the gossip I heard, they were miserable together. He wanted her money, she wanted his business connections, and neither of them particularly liked each other. They divorced after 5 years, which caused quite a scandal. Good, Cade said without sympathy. He deserved to be unhappy. Anyone who treats people the way he did deserves what they get. Karma, Eleanor agreed. Meanwhile, we got everything good. A wonderful family, a successful ranch, and most importantly, each other. Cade pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. You know what I think about sometimes? What if I had not overheard that conversation? What if I had returned to my room 5 minutes later, or walked down a different hallway? You would have married him, Eleanor. You would have been trapped in a loveless marriage, probably miserable for the rest of your life. But you did overhear, Eleanor pointed out, and you did not walk away. You walked through that door and you stood up for me when no one else would. That is what matters. I used to think it was chance, Cade said thoughtfully. Random luck that I happened to be in the right place at the right time. But now I think maybe it was something more. Maybe we were always meant to find each other. Destiny, Eleanor said softly. I like that idea. That somewhere in the universe, it was already written that you and I would meet, would fall in love, would build this life together. Destiny, chance, luck, whatever you want to call it, Cade said. I am just grateful it happened. They stood there as the sun set, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together, the family they had created, the love that had only grown stronger with the passing years. And Cade thought about that young cowboy he had been 30 years ago, dusty and tired from a cattle drive, with a pocket full of savings and dreams of buying a ranch. That young man had thought he knew what he wanted. He had been so certain that independence and land ownership were the keys to happiness. He had been saving for years, denying himself comforts and pleasures, all in service of that singular goal. And then he had heard a woman being treated as a commodity, had seen the quiet dignity in her face as she tried to accept a fate she did not want, and everything had changed. In the space of minutes, he had rewritten his entire future, giving away everything he had for a woman he did not even know. People might have called it impulsive, reckless, foolish. But Cade knew better. It had been the smartest thing he had ever done, because Eleanor was right. They had gotten everything good, not just material success, though they had that too. But more importantly, they had gotten each other. They had gotten a love that weathered all storms, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection, a family that brought them joy every single day. That night, after dinner, and after the children and grandchildren had gone to their various homes, Cade and Eleanor sat together in their bedroom, preparing for sleep. It was a familiar ritual after 30 years of marriage, comfortable and companionable. Cade, Eleanor said, as she brushed out her hair, now more silver than brown. Do you remember what you said to Mr. Hutchinson that first day? About me deserving someone who wanted my heart? I remember, Cade said, watching her reflection in the mirror. I just wanted you to know that you were right, Eleanor said, turning to face him. I did deserve that. Every woman deserves that, and I got it. I got a man who wanted my heart, who valued me for who I was rather than what I could bring to a marriage. I got you. Cade crossed the room and took her hands, pulling her to her feet. And I got a woman who saw past the dusty cowboy to the man underneath, who believed in me, who built a life with me, who gave me a family and a home and a reason to wake up grateful every single morning. They kissed, a gentle kiss full of 3 decades of love and intimacy and shared history. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. We did good, didn't we? Eleanor said. We did great, Cade corrected. Better than I ever dreamed possible. They climbed into bed, Eleanor settling into the curve of Cade's body, the way she had done thousands of times before. Cade wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling her heartbeat steady against his chest. I love you, Eleanor Crawford, he murmured. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that. I love you too, Cade, Eleanor replied. Thank you for seeing me, for valuing me, for choosing me." "Thank you for letting me," Kade said. "Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy with more heart than sense." "Best chance I ever took," Eleanor said, and Kade could hear the smile in her voice. They drifted off to sleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that they had found what so many people search for their entire lives: true love, real partnership, a forever kind of happiness. And if anyone had asked Kade whether he regretted giving away his life savings on that June day in 1882, he would have laughed. Regret? When that decision had led to this, when that single act of reckless generosity had given him literally everything that mattered. He had walked into that boarding house room intending to offer financial help and the freedom to choose. Instead, he had found his soulmate, his best friend, his partner in every sense of the word. He had found Eleanor, and Eleanor he had discovered over 30 years of marriage was worth more than all the money in the world. She was worth more than land or cattle, or any material thing he might have bought with his savings. She was worth everything he had given up, and more. Because in the end, Kade had learned the most important lesson of his life that day in June of 1882. Money could be earned again. Land could be purchased. Success could be achieved through hard work and determination. But love, real love, true love, was rare and precious and worth any price. And a woman who would stand with you through all of life's challenges, who would build dreams with you, who would give you children and grandchildren and a life filled with meaning, that woman was beyond price. Eleanor had been beyond price. She still was. And Kade Crawford, former cowboy turned successful rancher, husband and father and grandfather, went to sleep that night the same way he had gone to sleep every night for 30 years, grateful beyond measure that he had been brave enough to walk through a door, bold enough to speak up, and foolish enough to give away everything he owned for the chance to win a woman's heart. It had been the best trade he ever made, and he would make the same choice again, without hesitation, every single time.